Close your eyes and imagine the smell of damp earth and wood smoke clinging to your woolen tunic. You wake before the sun. The floor beneath you nothing but packed dirt and straw. You are a peasant in the Middle Ages, and your life is a constant gamble against the very world around you. To your left, your family huddles for warmth. To your right, the livestock stirs in the shadows of your small hut. Outside, the land belongs to a lord who demands your sweat, while the sky withholds the rain your crops desperately need. Beyond the village walls, whispers of a silent, black death are moving across the continent like a shadow. How do you survive when the law, the weather, and even the air you breathe seem determined to break you? This is how you endure the impossible. Close your eyes and breathe in. The air does not smell like the world you know. It is heavy with the scent of green growth, damp earth, animal dung, and the sharp, acidic tang of wood smoke that clings to your clothes and skin. You are standing on the edge of a village in the heart of Europe during the early years of the 14th century. To your left, a cluster of low, thatched roofs huddle together like sheep in a storm. To your right, the great fields stretch out in long, narrow strips of emerald and gold. This is your world. It is small, it is hard, and for now it is stable. But this is the quiet before a series of storms that will reshape humanity forever. You are a peasant. To the kings and chroniclers of this age, you are almost invisible, a mere statistic of the soil. But to you, your life is a complex dance of survival, faith, and community. You do not think of yourself as poor, because everyone you know lives exactly like this. You think of yourself as part of a rhythm, a cycle of the seasons that has turned for hundreds of years and, as far as you know, will turn for hundreds more. Look down at your hands. They are thick, calloused, and stained with the dark dirt of the fields. Those hands are your most precious tools. They are what stand between your family and starvation. Your day began before the sun even cleared the horizon, woken by the internal clock of a person whose life is dictated by light. There are no watches here. The only clock you know is the heavy iron bell in the stone tower of the parish church. It tells you when to pray, when to work, and when the day is done. As you walk toward the fields, you feel the weight of the social order on your shoulders. You do not own the land you walk upon. You belong to it, and in a way, the man who lives in the stone manor house on the hill owns you. This is the foundation of your world, the great exchange of the feudal system. The lord of the manor provides you with a strip of land to grow your food, and he promises to protect you with his sword if raiders come. In return, you owe him your labor. 3 days a week, you do not work for yourself. You work on the Lord's land, planting his crops, repairing his fences, and hauling his timber. It is a heavy tax paid in sweat and time. The great fields are not like the fenced pastures of the future. They are open and communal. You have your strips of land, and your neighbor has his, separated only by narrow ridges of unplowed turf. This means you must work together. You share the heavy plow, a massive wooden machine tipped with iron that takes 8 oxen to pull. Since no single peasant owns 8 oxen, you team up. You provide 2, your neighbor provides 2, and together you break the stubborn earth. This creates a bond that is stronger than friendship. It is a biological necessity. If you do not get along with your neighbors, you do not eat. The soil is everything. You understand it with a quasi-religious intensity. You know which patch stays too wet after a rain and which corner is perfect for barley. You know the exact moment the frost has left the ground enough to begin the spring sowing. This knowledge is not written in books, for you cannot read. It is written in your muscles and passed down in songs and stories told over a shared jug of ale. But life is not just about the soil. It is also about the soul. As you work, you hear the church bell ring for the Angelus. You stop, remove your felt cap, and cross yourself. In this world, the supernatural is just as real as the mud on your boots. You believe that angels watch over the crops and that demons lurk in the dark corners of the woods. The church is the center of your universe, the only building in the village made of stone. It is the only place where you see bright colors, the vivid reds and blues of the wall paintings that depict the joys of heaven and the terrifying fires of hell. The church provides the rhythm of your year. It is not all work. There are feast days, dozens of them, where the Lord is required to stop the work and the village celebrates. These are the days of dancing, wrestling matches, and drinking thick, cloudy ale. On these days, you forget the ache in your lower back. You forget that the grain stores are getting low. You are part of a community that celebrates together just as it suffers together. Follow the path back into the village as the sun begins to set. Your home is a cruck house, built from heavy timbers curved like the ribs of a great beast. The walls are wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks, mud, and straw. It is small, dark, and smoky. There are no windows, only shutters to keep out the night air which everyone knows carries the vapors of disease. In the center of the room, a small fire smolders on a stone hearth. There is no chimney. The smoke simply filters out through the thick thatch of the roof, turning the ceiling black with soot. You share this space with your family and, during the cold months, with your animals. Your best cow and a few pigs are huddled at one end of the house. Their body heat helps keep you warm, and their presence is a sign of wealth. If the animals are healthy, you are safe. The smell is overpowering to a modern nose, but to you, it is the smell of security. Dinner is a simple affair. Your wife has been tending the pottage, a thick stew that has been simmering for hours. It is mostly grains, beans, and whatever herbs could be gathered from the small garden behind the house. There might be a bit of salted pork if it is a special occasion, but mostly it is the bread that sustains you. This is not the white, fluffy bread of a palace. This is heavy, dark rye bread, so dense it feels like a brick in your hand. You wash it down with small ale, a weak, fermented drink that is safer to consume than the water from the local stream. As you sit by the fire, you look at your children. You have had 6, but only 3 are still alive. This is the reality of your world. Death is not a stranger. It is a neighbor. You have seen siblings die of the flux and neighbors wither away from a simple infection. You live on a knife's edge, though you do not always realize it. You are one bad harvest away from disaster. If the rains come too hard in August and rot the grain in the fields, or if a late frost kills the young shoots in May, you will starve. It is as simple and as brutal as that. Yet, in this moment, in the year 1300, there is a sense of growth. The population has been rising for 2 centuries. New villages are being carved out of the forests. The markets are busy. You have heard travelers speak of great cathedrals being built in the cities, reaching toward the sky with fingers of stone. You feel like you are part of a world that is expanding, a world that has mastered the earth. You do not know that the climate is already beginning to shift. You do not know that the long, warm summers that allowed your grandparents to thrive are coming to an end. You have no way of knowing that across the vast steppes of Asia, a tiny bacterium is beginning to move, or that the rains are about to start falling and will not stop for years. For now, you simply bank the fire and lie down on your thin mattress of straw. You listen to the breathing of your children and the rustle of the oxen in the corner. You are tired in a way that goes deeper than the skin, a fatigue that lives in the bone. But you are content. You have fulfilled your duty to the Lord, your duty to the church, and your duty to the soil. You believe that tomorrow will be much like today, and that the world you see through the cracks in your shutters is eternal. But the storm is coming. The golden age of the medieval peasant is about to collide with a series of catastrophes so great that they will break the very foundations of the world you know. You are about to enter a century of fire, water, and pestilence. This is the story of how you, the invisible person of history, will find a way to survive when the earth itself seems to turn against you. This is the end of the beginning. This is life before the storm. You wake up before the sun has even considered touching the horizon. The air inside your small timber and daub cottage is thick with the scent of damp straw, wood smoke, and the lingering musk of the family cow sleeping just a few feet away. As you pull on your rough wool tunic, you feel the stiffness in your joints, a physical reminder of yesterday's labor. You step outside and look up toward the hill. There, looming over the clusters of thatched roofs, is the stone manor house. It is not just a building. It is a presence. It is a shadow that defines every choice you make, every mouthful of bread you eat, and every year of your life. This is the heart of your world, and it is governed by an invisible, unbreakable tether known as the feudal contract. You are a peasant, likely a serf, which means you are bound to this soil. You are not a slave in the sense that you can be bought and sold like cattle, but you are certainly not free. You cannot leave this village without the Lord's permission. You cannot marry whom you wish without paying a fee. You cannot even grind your own grain into flour. To understand how you survive, you must first understand this complex web of obligations. It is a trade, a cold and calculated exchange of labor for protection. Walk with me through the muddy lanes toward the Lord's domain, the land he keeps specifically for his own use. Today is a day of weak work. This is the most basic building block of the feudal system. In exchange for the small plot of land you use to feed your family, you owe the Lord 3 days of labor every single week. You are not paid for this. Your sweat is the rent you pay for the right to exist on this earth. You carry your heavy wooden plow toward the fields, feeling the weight of the task ahead. If you do not show up, or if you work poorly, the bailiff will find you. The bailiff is the Lord's enforcer, a man who keeps the accounts and ensures no minute of your labor is wasted. As you reach the edge of the great open fields, you see the land is divided into long, narrow strips. You do not own a single block of soil. Instead, your strips are scattered among the strips of your neighbors and the strips of the Lord. This ensures that everyone gets a mix of the good, fertile soil near the stream and the rocky, difficult soil on the slope. It is a system designed for survival, not for profit. You work alongside your neighbors, your shoulders aching in rhythm with theirs. There is a sense of community here, but it is a community forged under pressure. Why do you do it? Why do you accept a life where half of your time belongs to someone else? You only have to look at the horizon to find the answer. In this age, the world outside your village is a terrifying place. There are stories of brigands hiding in the deep forests, of rogue knights who see your village as nothing more than a source of loot, and of distant wars that could spill over into your valley at any moment. The Lord provides the one thing you cannot provide for yourself, which is security. He owns the heavy horses, the iron mail, and the sharp swords. He lives in the stone house that can withstand a siege. When the bells ring an alarm, you and your family will run to his gates for shelter. You give him your labor because, without his protection, you would have nothing at all. However, the Lord's shadow extends far beyond the fields. Let us look at the smaller, more frustrating ways he controls your life. These are known as the banalities, Imagine you have spent weeks tending your small crop of rye. You harvest it, winnow it, and now you have bags of grain that need to be turned into flour so your wife can bake bread. You cannot simply take a hand mill and grind it at home. That is illegal. You are required by law to take your grain to the Lord's mill. The miller, who is an employee of the Lord, will take a portion of your grain as a fee for the service. It is a monopoly that ensures the Lord gets a cut of every loaf of bread baked in the village. The same applies to the Lord's oven and even his winepress. You pay to use them, and you pay for the privilege of being alive. Then there are the taxes. In the autumn, when the air turns crisp and the leaves begin to fall, the Lord's officials come to collect the tallage. This is a tax that can be levied at the Lord's will. There is no set amount and no negotiation. If the Lord needs money for a new tower or to pay for a journey to the king's court, he simply takes it from you. You might also face the merchet, a fine you must pay when your daughter gets married. Why? Because the Lord is losing one of his workers. If she marries a man from another village, she leaves the Lord's land, and he demands compensation for the loss of her future children and her labor. It feels like a personal insult, a deep intrusion into your family life. But in the eyes of the law, you are an asset on a ledger. The most bitter of all is the Harriet. Imagine your father has passed away after a long life of toil. You are grieving, trying to figure out how to manage the farm without his strength. The Lord's bailiff arrives at your door, not to offer condolences, but to take your father's best beast. This is the death tax. The Lord claims the best cow or the strongest ox as a final payment for the life your father spent on the land. It is a cruel blow that often leaves a struggling family on the brink of starvation, yet it is a fundamental part of the contract. Despite all of this, you are not entirely without a voice. The village is not a lawless place. Every few weeks you gather for the manorial court. This is not a court where high lords debate grand politics. This is a place where you and your neighbors settle the grittier details of life. Who let their pigs wander into the neighbor's garden? Who failed to repair their section of the fence? Who stole a handful of hay from the Lord's meadow? The court is presided over by the Lord or his steward, but the jury is made up of men like you. This is where you find a small measure of agency. You can use the custom of the manor to defend yourself. Custom is the most powerful word in your vocabulary. If you can prove that your family has used a certain path or grazed sheep on a certain hill for 100 years, the Lord often cannot take that right away. The contract goes both ways. He provides protection and land, but he is also bound by the traditions of the village. As the sun begins to set, casting long, orange light across the furrows of the field, you finally finish your day's work for the Lord. You walk back toward your own small strip of land to spend the few remaining hours of twilight working for yourself. Your back is a map of pain, and your hands are calloused and stained with the dark earth. You look up at the manor house once more. Its windows are beginning to glow with candlelight, a luxury you can barely imagine. You might feel a flicker of resentment, but you also feel a strange kind of stability. In your mind, the world is organized in a great chain. God is at the top, followed by the king, then the lords, and finally people like you at the base. Every person has a place and a purpose. This hierarchy provides a sense of order in a world that often feels chaotic and dangerous. You survive because you know the rules. You survive because you understand that your life is a series of trade-offs. You give up your freedom to ensure your family does not starve or fall victim to a raider's blade. Under the Lord's shadow, life is a constant negotiation between duty and survival. You are the engine that keeps the entire system running. Without your labor, the Lord would have no wealth. Without your grain, the cities would starve. You are the foundation of the medieval world, even if the weight of it sometimes feels like it will crush you into the very dirt you plow. You walk into your cottage, the smell of the evening pottage filling the small space, and you sit down. Tomorrow you will wake up and do it all again, bound to the land, bound to the Lord, and bound to the cycle of the seasons. This is the feudal contract, and it is the only world you have ever known. The sun has not yet crested the horizon, but your body knows the time. It is a deep biological clock, tuned not to the ticking of a mechanical device, but to the subtle shift in the temperature of the air and the first tentative chirps of birds in the thatch above your head. You roll off a thin mattress stuffed with straw and dried bracken. Your joints ache with a familiarity that borders on intimacy. This is the start of another day in the rhythm of the medieval village, a world where your survival is etched into the very soil beneath your fingernails. As you stand, the floor beneath your bare feet is hard-packed earth, swept clean but always yielding a fine dust that settles on everything. You move through the dim light of your cottage. It is a simple structure, built of timber frames with walls of wattle and daub, a mixture of woven hazel sticks plastered with mud, straw, and cow dung. It smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and the pungent, heavy scent of the livestock. At the far end of this single room, separated only by a low wooden partition or perhaps nothing at all, your family ox or a few precious sheep huddle together. Their body heat is your primary source of warmth during the long winter months, a living furnace that keeps the frost from your bones while you sleep. You move to the center of the room where the hearth lies. There is no chimney here, only a hole in the roof that allows the smoke to drift upward, staining the rafters a deep, oily black over the years. You stir the embers of last night's fire and add a few bundles of brushwood. The light flickers, illuminating the few possessions you own. A heavy iron pot, a few wooden bowls, and a spinning wheel tucked into the corner. Your life is not defined by what you own, but by what you do and who you are to the people living in the 10 or 12 houses that make up this cluster of humanity. Breakfast is a humble affair. There is no coffee, no tea, and certainly no sugar. You break off a piece of dark, dense bread. This is not the white, fluffy loaf of a modern bakery. This is maslin bread, made from a mixture of rye and wheat, or perhaps even barley and ground peas if the grain stores are running low. It is gritty and tough, often containing bits of stone from the village mill, but it is the fuel that will carry you through the next 6 hours of backbreaking labor. You wash it down with a long pull from a wooden tankard of small beer. This ale is weak, unfiltered, and cloudy, but it is far safer than the water from the local stream, which is often tainted by the runoff from the pastures. In this world, ale is not just a luxury or a way to forget your troubles. It is liquid bread, providing the essential calories and hydration you need to endure the physical demands of the fields. Stepping outside, the village of your birth greets you with a cacophony of familiar sounds. You hear the rhythmic thud of a neighbor chopping wood, the bleating of sheep being driven to the common pasture, and the distant ringing of the church bell. That bell is the heartbeat of your existence. It marks the hours of prayer, the start of the workday, and the warnings of danger. You shoulder your tools, perhaps a heavy wooden spade tipped with iron or a sickle worn thin by years of sharpening, and begin the walk to the open fields. The geography of your world is a patchwork of long, narrow strips of land. This is the open field system, a communal way of life that ensures no single family has all the best soil or all the worst. Your strips are scattered among those of your neighbors, a design that forces cooperation. You cannot plow your land whenever you feel like it. You must work in concert with the village. You do not own a full team of 8 oxen yourself. Nobody in the village does. Instead, you provide 1 ox, your neighbor provides another, and another man brings 2 more until a full team is assembled to pull the massive, heavy moldboard plow through the stubborn clay. This is the sweat of your existence. Plowing is not a poetic endeavor. It is a brutal, exhausting struggle against the earth itself. You walk behind the team for miles, your boots sinking into the muck, your muscles screaming as you fight to keep the blade straight. The damp cold of a northern European spring bites through your woolen tunic, and the smell of turned earth and animal sweat fills your lungs. There is a deep, unspoken bond between you and the men working alongside you. You know their tempers, their strengths, and their failures as well as you know your own. If one man slacks, the whole team suffers. If the harvest fails, you all starve together. By midday, the sun is high, and the village women arrive in the fields. They have been busy since dawn as well, tending to the kitchen gardens, weeding the flax, and milking the cows. They bring more ale and perhaps a thick pottage in a communal pot. This pottage is the cornerstone of your diet. It is a thick stew of whatever is in season. Onions, leeks, cabbage, and plenty of legumes like peas and beans. On rare occasions, there might be a scrap of salted pork or a bit of bacon fat to add flavor. But for the most part, your strength is built on plants. You sit on the edge of the field, the dirt still on your hands, and eat in silence, staring out over the landscape that has shaped your family for generations. The rhythms of your life are dictated by the calendar of the church and the cycle of the seasons. You live for the holy days or holidays, which provide the only respite from the relentless grind. On these days, the labor stops. The village gathers at the church, not just for the mystery of the Mass, but for the social life that keeps the community whole. You might participate in a wrestling match on the village green, or watch the young men play a chaotic, violent game of football that ranges across the entire parish. There is dancing, and if the ale is flowing freely, there is gossip and laughter that echoes through the narrow lanes. But the shadow of the seasons is always present. In the autumn, the pressure intensifies. The harvest is a race against time and the unpredictable weather. Every able-bodied person, from the youngest child to the oldest grandmother, is out in the fields. You swing the sickle until your back feels like it will snap, gathering the precious stalks of grain that will mean the difference between life and death in the coming months. The grain is bound into sheaves and taken to the tithe barn, where the church takes its 10% before you can even think of filling your own larder. Then comes the winter, the time of the great quiet. The fields are dormant, and the village shrinks inward. You spend your days by the fire, mending tools, repairing the thatch on your roof, or spinning wool into yarn. This is the time of the hungry gap, those leaning weeks in late winter when the grain bins are nearly empty and the first greens of spring have yet to appear. You learn to live with a constant, nagging hollow in your stomach, watching the weather and praying for an early thaw. Despite the hardship, your life in the village is not one of isolation. You are part of a complex, interlocking web of obligations and rights. You attend the manorial court, where you and your peers act as a jury to settle disputes over boundaries, straying livestock, or petty thefts. You are the guardians of your own local customs. You know every hedge, every stream, and every ancient tree in the parish. Your identity is not found in your individual achievements, but in your place within this small, resilient ecosystem. As the light fades and the evening bell rings, you make your way back to your cottage. The air is cooling, and the scent of wood smoke is thick again as every hearth in the village is stoked for the night. You enter your home, the familiar warmth of the animals greeting you. You eat a final bowl of pottage and perhaps share a few words with your family by the dying light of the fire. There is no ambition for a different life, for you cannot imagine one. You are a part of the earth as much as the oak trees and the rye. You lay down on your straw mattress, the ache in your limbs a testament to another day survived. The rhythms of the village have claimed you once more, and in the deep, dark silence of the medieval night, you sleep the heavy sleep of the exhausted, ready to rise and do it all again when the first light touches the thatch. You wake up, but the light is wrong. It is not the golden hue of a spring morning that usually coaxes you from your straw mattress. Instead, it is a dull, bruised gray. You hear a sound that has become the rhythmic backdrop of your life for weeks now. It is the steady, relentless drumming of rain on your thatched roof. You stand up, and your feet find the familiar dampness of the dirt floor. The air inside your small hut is thick with the scent of wet wool and wood smoke that refuses to rise through the sodden thatch. You open the door and look out toward the fields that should be teeming with the promise of a bountiful harvest. Instead, you see a lake of mud. This is the spring of 1315. You do not know it yet, but the world you have lived in for generations is shifting. The medieval warm period, a time of relatively stable weather and reliable crops that allowed the population of Europe to explode, has come to an end. The sky has turned cold, and it has forgotten how to stop crying. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, the fabric heavy and damp against your skin, and you realize that the ground is too saturated to even take a plow. The seeds you managed to sow weeks ago are not sprouting. They are rotting in the earth, drowning in a deluge that shows no sign of stopping. As the weeks turn into months, the anxiety in your village begins to curdle into something far sharper and more terrifying. You walk down the narrow path toward the village common, and you see your neighbors standing in the rain, their heads bowed. There is no talk of the upcoming festival or the gossip of the manor. Everyone is looking at the sky. In a world where your entire survival depends on the 3 months of summer sun, a season of rain is a death sentence. By midsummer, the price of grain has already begun to creep upward. The mill, which usually hums with the sound of grinding wheat, stands silent because there is nothing to grind. You go to the local market, hoping to find enough oats to make a thin porridge, but the sight that greets you is harrowing. The merchants who usually have overflowing sacks of grain are shaking their heads. What little food is available is being sold at prices that are 3, 4, or 5 times what they were just a year ago. You reach into your tunic and feel the few coins you have saved. They feel small and useless. You realize that even if you spent every penny you possessed, you could only buy enough to feed your family for a week. The rain continues through August. The hay crops are ruined, which means there will be no fodder to keep the livestock alive through the winter. You see the sheep standing in the fields, their wool matted and green with algae, their hooves rotting from the constant moisture. A strange sickness, a murrain, begins to spread among the cattle. You find your own cow, the one that provides the milk for your children, shivering in the mud. Her ribs are starting to show. You know that if she dies, your last safety net is gone. By autumn, the reality of the Great Famine has set in. There is no harvest to bring home. The fields are a graveyard of black, stunted stalks. You watch as the lords and the church officials begin to tighten their grip on their own stores. The granaries of the manor house are guarded now. You see men with bows standing on the walls, watching the hungry peasants who linger near the gates. The social contract, that fragile agreement where you provide labor in exchange for protection and the right to farm, is beginning to fray. When the belly is empty, The law of the land feels like a distant memory. Winter arrives, and it is a season of silence. Usually, winter is a time of indoor work and storytelling, but now there is no energy for stories. You sit in the dark because you cannot afford candles. You huddle together with your family for warmth, the cold seeping through the walls and into your very bones. The hunger is not a sharp pain anymore. It has become a dull, constant ache, a heavy weight in the center of your being. You find yourself looking at the handful of seed grain you have hidden under the floorboards. That grain is your only hope for next year. If you eat it now, you might live through the month, but you will surely die next year when there is nothing to plant. You hear rumors from the next village over. They say that people are eating dogs and cats. They say that travelers are disappearing on the roads. There are even whispers of things far worse, stories of parents looking at their children with eyes that are no longer human. You try to shut these thoughts out, but the desperation is a physical presence in the room. You have already slaughtered your draft ox because you could not feed it. Without that ox, you will have to pull the plow yourself if the sun ever returns. You have traded your best tools for a sack of moldy flour. You are stripping away your future just to survive the present. The spring of 1316 brings no relief. The rains return with a vengeance. The ground, already soaked, becomes a morass of filth. This is the second year of crop failure, and this is when the true horror begins. The elderly in the village begin to quietly stop eating so that the children can have a few more bites. You go to the church to pray, but the priest looks as haggard and hollow-eyed as you do. People begin to wonder if God has truly abandoned them. You see the bodies of those who did not survive the winter being buried in shallow, communal graves because no one has the strength to dig deep into the frozen, wet earth. You decide to venture further afield, perhaps to the nearby town, thinking that surely there must be food there. But as you walk the muddy tracks, you see the roads are littered with the dead. These are not victims of violence, but victims of the Great Famine. They are lying in the ditches, their mouths stained green from trying to eat grass or weeds in their final hours. When you reach the town, you find the gates are barred. The townsfolk are starving too, and they have no charity left for a wandering peasant. You see the bread riots breaking out in the streets, where people are killed for a single loaf of coarse, dark bread. You return home to find that the murrain has taken the rest of the village livestock. The smell of rotting carcasses hangs heavy in the damp air. There is no salt to preserve the meat of the animals that died, because the salt pans on the coast cannot dry without the sun. Everything is rotting. The wood is too wet to burn hot, the clothes are too damp to stay warm, and the very air feels like it is decomposing. You are living in a world that is dissolving into gray water and black mud. During these years, from 1315 to 1317, you learn what it truly means to survive. You learn that the human spirit is incredibly resilient, but also that it can be broken. You see your neighbors, people you have known your whole life, turn on each other over a handful of dried peas. You see the pride of the village disappear as everyone is reduced to the same level of animal desperation. Yet you also see moments of incredible sacrifice. You see a mother walking miles in the pouring rain to bring a single turnip back to her sick child. You see the way people huddle together, sharing the meager warmth of their bodies when all other heat is gone. By the time the weather finally begins to break in 1318, the world is a different place. Perhaps 10 to 15% of the population is gone. The graveyards are full, and many of the smaller hamlets have been abandoned entirely. You are one of the ones who made it, but you are not the same person you were before the rain started. Your body is smaller, your bones more brittle, and your heart is guarded. You look at the sun when it finally emerges from the clouds, not with joy, but with a cautious suspicion. You have learned that the sky can be a cruel master. You stand in your field, finally able to turn the soil again. The work is harder than it used to be because you are weak and you have no ox. But as you drop the remaining seeds into the earth, you feel a flicker of something you haven't felt in years. It is not quite hope, but it is a stubborn determination. You have survived the Great Famine. You have lived through the years when the earth refused to give and the sky refused to clear. You carry the memory of the cold and the hunger in your very marrow, a reminder that the world can turn on you at any moment. You work the land with a new intensity, knowing now that the rhythm of the seasons is not a guarantee, but a gift that can be snatched away by a single season of rain. The air in the village has changed. It is no longer the smell of wood smoke and curing meats that greets you when you step out of your door in the early dawn. Instead, it is the heavy, cloying scent of wet earth and decay. You stand on the threshold of your cottage, your hand resting on the rough, damp timber of the doorframe, and you look out toward the fields that were supposed to be your lifeline. But there is no gold there. The wheat, which should be standing tall and swaying in a late summer breeze, is a tangled, blackened mess. The stalks are broken, bent double by weeks of relentless, driving rain that has turned the soil into a sucking marsh. You take a step forward, and your boot sinks into the mud with a wet, heavy thud. This is not the mud of a normal spring. This is the mud of a world that has stopped working. You realize, with a cold sinking feeling in your chest that is far sharper than the morning chill, that the harvest has failed. Not just in your small strip of land, but across the entire manor. The implications of this do not hit you all at once. They come in waves. First, you think of the grain bin in the corner of your hut. It is already half empty. Then you think of the Lord's bailiff. He will still come for his share. He will still demand the taxes, the labor, and the rent because the machinery of the feudal world does not stop for a thunderstorm, even if that storm lasts for 3 months. You are entering what the elders call the hunger gap. But this year, the gap is not a narrow ditch you can jump over. It is a wide, yawning chasm. Usually, the hunger gap is that lean time in late spring and early summer when the last of the previous year's grain is running low and the new crops are not yet ready for the scythe. You are used to a bit of a rumble in your stomach during May and June. You are used to stretching the flour with ground peas or beans. But this is different. This is a total failure. The grain that did manage to grow is riddled with ergot, a black fungus that looks like tiny rooster spurs. You know from the stories of your grandmother that eating the black grain leads to the holy fire, a sickness that makes your limbs burn with an invisible flame until they turn black and drop off, or drives you into a screaming madness. Survival now becomes a different kind of labor. It is no longer about the rhythm of the plow, but the desperate, calculated search for anything that can be turned into a calorie. You walk toward the edge of the forest, the Lord's forest. In good years, you stay out of the deep woods. The forest laws are harsh. To be caught with a deer or even a rabbit from the Lord's preserve could mean the loss of a hand or a trip to the gallows. But as you look back at your cottage and see your youngest child sitting by the door, his face unnaturally pale and his eyes too large for his head, the fear of the gallows begins to pale in comparison to the fear of the silence that comes with starvation. You begin to forage. You look for things you would normally walk past. You gather nettles, being careful to pick the young tops that won't sting your throat once they are boiled into a thin, watery soup. You dig for pignuts, small tubers hidden beneath the soil that taste vaguely of hazelnut but require hours of backbreaking digging for just a handful of food. You look for wild vetches and acorns. You know that acorns are bitter and full of tannins that will tie your stomach in knots. So you spend hours leaching them in the stream, soaking them in wicker baskets until the bitter brown water runs clear. You grind these dried, leached acorns into a gritty, gray meal. It is not bread. It does not smell like bread. When you bake it on a hot stone, it is hard and tastes of dust and old wood, but it fills the void in your belly for a few hours. The village becomes a place of secrets. In the early days of the failure, there was a sense of community. Neighbors shared a little of what they had. But as the weeks turn into months and the rain continues to fall, the doors of the cottages stay closed. When you walk down the central path, people do not meet your eye. They are afraid that if they look at you, you might see the small plume of smoke from their hearth and know they have found a hedgehog to roast or a few hidden handfuls of rye. The social fabric, once held together by the shared work of the plow and the shared prayers in the church, begins to fray. You hear rumors of people eating things that should never be eaten. You hear of families who have slaughtered their only plow ox, a desperate move that ensures they might survive the winter but guarantees they will have no way to plant in the spring. It is a slow-motion suicide of the farm. One afternoon, the bailiff arrives. You see him coming from a distance, mounted on a horse that looks better fed than any person in the village. He carries a ledger made of heavy parchment, and he is flanked by 2 men-at-arms. They are here for the tallage, a tax the Lord can levy at will. You stand by your door as he approaches. He does not look at the rotted fields. He does not look at your thinning frame. He looks only at his list. He demands 3 shillings, or the equivalent in goods. You have no shillings. You haven't seen a silver coin in over a year. You offer him a stack of cured hides, the last of your leather. He sneers but takes them, signaling his men to toss them into a cart. You realize then that the Lord is not your protector. He is a landlord, and the rent is due whether the sky provides or not. To him, the famine is a loss of revenue. To you, it is the end of the world. As the winter sets in, the hunger takes on a physical shape. It is no longer just a feeling. It is a transformation of your own body. You feel a strange, heavy lethargy. Every movement, even lifting a bucket of water, requires a conscious effort of will. Your skin takes on a yellowish, translucent hue, and your hair loses its luster, becoming brittle like dry straw. The most terrifying part is the swelling. Your ankles and your belly begin to puff out, a cruel trick of the body that makes you look well-fed even as your muscles are being consumed from within. This is the edema of starvation. You move through your days in a dreamlike haze. The world feels distant, muted. You stop hearing the birds. In fact, there are no birds. They have either fled the rain or been caught by desperate hands and roasted over small fires. You find yourself sitting in the dark of your cottage, staring at the embers of a fire made from green wood that refuses to put out heat. You think about the grain. You think about how precious every single kernel is. You remember how, in years of plenty, you would toss a handful to the chickens without a second thought. Now, you find yourself picking through the floor rushes, hoping to find a single dried pea that might have rolled away months ago. When you find one, you don't eat it. You put it in your pocket, saving it for the morning, because the thought of having nothing to look forward to in the morning is worse than the hunger itself. You have to make choices that no human should have to make. You have a small store of seed grain, hidden beneath the floorboards in a ceramic jar. This is the grain for next year. It is the promise of a future. If you eat it now, you might survive until the spring, but you will have nothing to plant. You will be a beggar, a landless wanderer on the roads, which is a fate often worse than death in this world. But as you listen to the low, weak cough of your wife in the corner, the choice becomes a jagged knife in your heart. Do you feed your family today and guarantee their death tomorrow? Or do you watch them fade away while holding on to a jar of seeds? This is the psychological warfare of a failed harvest. It breaks the spirit long before it breaks the body. You see the change in your neighbors. The man who was once known for his jokes is now silent and aggressive, clutching a heavy stick whenever anyone walks past his garden. The priest speaks of the famine as a punishment from God for the sins of the people, but you find it hard to believe that your small sins deserve the slow, agonizing death of an entire village. You find yourself looking at the church's gilded cross and wondering why it hasn't been sold to buy grain from the merchants in the south who still have full granaries. But you are a survivor. You learn to trick your stomach. You drink huge amounts of water before you eat your meager portion of weed-filled pottage. You bind your waist tight with a cord of hemp, believing the old wives' tale that it keeps the stomach from shrinking too painfully. You learn which mosses can be boiled to make a thick, flavorless gelatin that at least feels like food as it goes down. You spend your days in a state of watchful waiting. You wait for the rain to stop. You wait for the frost to kill the rot. You wait for the moment when you can go back into the fields and try to coax life out of the mud once again. The famine of the failed harvest is a lesson in the fragility of your existence. You realize that your entire life, your family's history, and your children's future are all balanced on the head of a pin, and that pin is the weather. You are not a master of the earth. You are its servant, and sometimes the earth is a cruel master. You look out one last time before you close your door for the night. The rain has finally turned to a light mist. In the distance, the manor house stands on the hill, its windows flickering with candlelight. They are eating there. They have stores. They have wine. You turn back to your cold, dark room and the empty bowl on the table. You are still alive. For today, that is the only victory you can claim. You will wake up tomorrow, and you will find something to eat, even if it is only the bark of a birch tree or a handful of boiled grass. You will survive because that is what you were born to do. You will survive until the sun comes out again, and the mud turns back into soil. The rhythm of the seasons may have been broken, but your will to see the next spring is not. You lie down on your straw mat, the hunger a dull, constant ache, and you wait for the light. Segment 6 will continue this journey into the dark heart of the medieval world. You stand at the edge of your village as the sun begins to set, casting long amber shadows across the fields that have finally, after so many lean years, begun to yield a decent harvest. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant smoke of cooking fires. For the first time in a generation, there is a sense of cautious hope. The Great Famine is a story told by the elders, a dark memory of hunger that your parents survived but rarely speak of without a shudder. You are young, or perhaps you have simply reached a middle age that felt impossible a decade ago. The lords are still demanding, the work is still backbreaking, and the tithes still take more than you wish to give, but the belly is full. You believe, as most do in this year of 1347, that the worst of the world's trials have passed. But then the rumors begin to arrive. They do not come with the blare of trumpets or the visible march of an invading army. Instead, they arrive as whispers, hitching a ride on the backs of weary travelers and spice merchants who pass through the larger market towns. You hear them while you are sitting in the dim, straw-scented corners of the local tavern or while waiting your turn at the grain mill. A merchant from the south speaks of a great dying in the east. He talks of lands so far away they sound like myths, places where the sun rises out of the great grassy plains of the Mongol Empire. He says that a cloud of death has descended upon those lands, a pestilence so fierce that it has emptied entire cities in a matter of weeks. At first, you and your neighbors dismiss it. The world is a vast and mysterious place, filled with strange monsters and distant wars that have nothing to do with your small patch of dirt. You tell yourself that these are just the tall tales of men who have spent too much time on the road and too much coin on ale. You think that surely, if God were to strike down the world, he would start with the heathens and leave your quiet Christian village in peace. But the whispers do not stop. They grow louder, more frequent, and more terrifying. You hear of the Great Silk Road, that massive artery of trade that connects your world to the treasures of the East. For centuries, it has brought silk, pepper, ginger, and cloves to the tables of the rich. Now, the travelers say it is bringing something else. They tell stories of a darkness that started in the high steppes of Central Asia, perhaps near the shores of the Caspian Sea. They speak of the Golden Horde, the fierce Mongol warriors who rule the East, and how even their mighty armies are falling like grass before a scythe. By the time the autumn of 1347 arrives, the news has moved from the realm of legend into a chilling reality. You hear of a city called Kaffa, a busy trading port on the edge of the Black Sea. It is a place where Italian merchants from Genoa have a fortified base, a hub of commerce where East meets West. The story goes that the city was under siege by the Mongol forces. For months, the Italians held out behind their high stone walls. But the attackers were not just fighting with arrows and swords. A mysterious sickness broke out in the Mongol camp, killing thousands of soldiers a day. Imagine the scene as it is described to you by a terrified friar passing through your village. He tells you that the Mongol commander, in a fit of desperate rage and perhaps a touch of macabre genius, decided to share his misery. He ordered the bodies of his dead soldiers to be loaded onto giant catapults and hurled over the walls of Kaffa. You can almost see it in your mind, the heavy, rotting forms soaring through the pale blue sky, crashing into the narrow streets and onto the wooden roofs of the unsuspecting merchants. The people of Kaffa tried to throw the bodies back into the sea as quickly as they could, but it was too late. The air was already tainted. The death had entered the city. Panic seized the Genoese merchants. They scrambled onto their galleys, hauling up the anchors and unfurling the sails to flee the cursed port. They thought they were escaping to the safety of home, to the familiar docks of Italy and the Mediterranean. What they did not know, and what you are only beginning to grasp through the filter of these frightening stories, is that they were carrying the end of the world with them. You picture those ships now, long, low vessels powered by oars and wind, cutting through the waves of the Black Sea and passing through the narrow waters of the Bosporus. Inside the dark, cramped holds of those ships, tucked away among the sacks of precious grain and the bales of fine silk, were the real invaders. Not the soldiers you are used to fearing, but rats. Thousands of black rats, their fur slick with the grime of the docks, moved silently through the cargo. And on those rats lived fleas, tiny, sightless hitchhikers carrying a microscopic passenger that would soon rewrite the history of your world. The news reaches your village that the first of these ships has arrived in the port of Messina, on the island of Sicily, in October. The accounts are like something out of a nightmare. The people of Messina saw the ships approaching and went down to the docks to greet them, expecting wine, spices, and news from the east. What they found instead were ghost ships. Most of the sailors were already dead, their bodies slumped over the oars or tangled in the rigging. Those who were still alive were barely recognizable as men. They were shivering with fever, their faces twisted in agony. The most terrifying part of the story, the detail that makes the hair on your neck stand up as you listen in the fading light of the village square, is the description of the sickness itself. It is not like the slow wasting of the chest cough or the quick violence of the flux. The victims develop hard, painful swellings in their groins and armpits, some as small as a lentil and others as large as an apple. These are the buboes, dark and pulsing with fluid. If you have these, the story goes, you have only days to live. Then come the black spots, the bruises that appear all over the skin as the body begins to die from within. This is why some are starting to call it the Great Mortality, or the Pestilence. The authorities in Messina tried to drive the ships away with fire and arrows, but it was useless. The rats had already scurried down the mooring ropes. They had already vanished into the cellars and the granaries of the city. The fleas had already found new hosts. Within days, the people of Messina began to die. Then it was the people of the surrounding countryside. Then the ships, driven away from one port, simply sailed to the next, spreading the venom to Pisa, to Genoa, and to Venice. You sit by your hearth at night, the fire flickering against the stone walls of your cottage, and you realize that the world has become very small. The distance between a port in Sicily and your own village feels like nothing at all. You look at your children as they sleep on their pallets of straw, and for the first time, the abundance of the harvest feels like a hollow victory. The grain in your barn, the very thing that was supposed to ensure your survival, might be the very place where the rats will hide when they finally arrive. You wonder what you can do. The priests tell you that this is a scourge from God, a punishment for the sins of a wicked world. They advise prayer, fasting, and repentance. The local barber surgeon talks about the alignment of the stars and the poisonous miasma, a bad air that travels on the wind. He suggests carrying sweet-smelling herbs or lighting fires of aromatic wood to purify the atmosphere. You see people beginning to look at each other with suspicion. A cough, a sneeze, or a slight fever is no longer just a common ailment. It is a potential death sentence for the entire household. You are a peasant, used to the rhythms of the earth and the predictable cruelty of the lords. But this is something different. This is an invisible enemy that does not care about your status or your piety. It is moving across the map of Europe like a stain, leaping from the ports to the inland cities, following the very trade routes that were supposed to bring prosperity. As the winter of 1347 begins to bite, you hear that the pestilence has reached the great city of Florence. They say the dead are being piled into trenches because the graveyards are full. They say that parents are abandoning their children and priests are refusing to give the last rites out of pure, unadulterated terror. The social order, the very thing that has defined every moment of your life, is starting to crack under the weight of the mounting corpses. You look out your small window at the frost-covered fields. The world is quiet, but it is a heavy, expectant silence. You know now that the whispers from the east were not just stories. They were a warning. The pestilence is no longer a distant rumor. It is a presence, a cold wind blowing from the south and the east, carrying with it the end of the life you have known. You realize that surviving the famine and the lords was only the beginning. The greatest test of your life, and the lives of everyone you know, is about to walk through the village gates. The ships are in the harbors. The rats are in the streets. The fleas are waiting. And as you pull your thin blanket tighter against the chill, you can almost hear the rhythmic thud of the oars of those Genoese galleys, bringing the darkness closer with every stroke. The era of the Black Death has begun, and the medieval world will never be the same again. You stand at the edge of your village, the same village where your ancestors have tilled the soil for generations. The air should smell of damp earth and wood smoke, but lately, there is a new scent hanging over the thatched roofs. It is a heavy, cloying smell that clings to the back of your throat. It is the smell of decay mixed with the sharp, acidic sting of vinegar that your neighbors are splashing on their doorframes in a desperate, futile attempt to keep the unseen enemy at bay. You have heard the stories coming up the road from the south. They say the great mortality has arrived, a sickness so swift and so cruel that it takes a person from perfect health to the grave in less than 3 days. As a peasant in the mid-14th century, your life has always been defined by the rhythm of the seasons and the demands of your lord. But now the rhythm has broken. The bells of the parish church, which usually signal the start of the workday or the call to prayer, are ringing almost constantly. They toll for the dead until the bell ringer himself falls ill, and then a terrifying silence settles over the valley. You walk down the narrow dirt path between the cottages, and you see the signs of a world coming apart at the joints. You notice the first symptom on your neighbor, a man you have worked alongside in the wheat fields since you were both children. He is shivering in the midday sun, his face flushed with a fever that seems to burn from the inside out. He reaches up to scratch his neck, and you see it. Beneath his ear, there is a swelling, a hard, painful lump the size of an apple. It is dark, purple, and oozing. This is the bubo, the mark of the pestilence. Within hours, black spots will appear on his arms and thighs, a sign that his blood is turning to poison within his veins. You back away, your heart hammering against your ribs. There is no medicine for this. The local wise woman has already fled to the woods, and the priest is shuttered inside the church, shouting prayers through a heavy oak door. The plague does not just kill the body. It kills the social fabric that has held your world together for 500 years. You see a mother turn her back on her coughing child. You see brothers locking their sisters out of the house. The fear is so cold and so sharp that it cuts through the strongest bonds of blood and affection. You are told that the air itself is corrupt, filled with bad vapors called miasma. You hold a bundle of dried lavender and wormwood to your nose, hoping the sweet scent will act as a shield. But you know deep down that it is like trying to stop a flood with a handful of straw. The streets are no longer filled with the sounds of livestock and gossip. Instead, you hear the heavy thud of wooden wheels on stone. The death carts are passing. In the larger towns, men shout for you to bring out your dead, piling bodies like cords of firewood. In your small village, you are left to dig the pits yourself. You dig until your hands are raw and your back feels like it will snap. But the pits are never deep enough or large enough. You begin to see the world through the lens of the dance of death, or the danse macabre. It is an image that starts to appear everywhere, on the walls of churches and in the stories told by travelers. You see a skeleton, grinning and nimble, leading a frantic line of people toward a yawning grave. In this dance, the social order you have always known is mocked. The skeleton holds the hand of a king, a bishop, a merchant, and a peasant like you. In the eyes of the plague, your rags and the king's silk are the same. Death is the only true equalizer. You wonder if this is the end of the world. Many of your neighbors believe it is. You see groups of people wandering the roads, their backs bare and bloody. These are the flagellants. They whip themselves with leather thongs tipped with metal studs, crying out for God's mercy. They believe that by punishing their own flesh, they can atone for the sins of humanity and stop the pestilence. You watch them pass, a grisly procession of moans and chanting, and you feel a sense of profound helplessness. If the church cannot save you, And if the king cannot protect you, who is left? But then you look toward the manor house on the hill. The Lord, the man who owns the land you walk on and the very air you breathe, is terrified. For the first time in your life, you see the master as vulnerable as the servant. He has barricaded himself inside his stone walls, refusing to see any of his tenants. But the plague does not care about stone walls. His servants are dying. His harvests are rotting in the fields because there is no one to pick them, and his wealth is becoming useless. You realize that while the world is ending for many, the world that remains will be fundamentally different. If you survive, you will be one of the few left who knows how to handle a plow or shear a sheep. For the first time, your labor is not a burden you owe to a lord. It is a precious commodity. You feel a strange, flickering spark of something you have never felt before. It is not quite hope, but it is a realization of power. As the weeks turn into months, you learn the grim art of survival. You avoid the crowded markets. You stop touching the coins that come from the city. You spend your days in the high pastures, far away from the stagnant air of the valley. You watch the smoke from the burial fires rise into the gray sky, and you wait. You see the village doctor, dressed in a long leather cloak and a mask with a bird-like beak. The beak is stuffed with spices to filter the air. He looks like a nightmare creature, a giant crow scavenging among the ruins of humanity. He offers no cures, only charcoal to blacken the sores and prayers to ease the passing. You see the breakdown of the old ways as a source of both horror and opportunity. When the village smith dies, no one is there to fix the plows. When the miller dies, the grain stays in the husks. The Lord eventually comes out of his manor, his face pale and his voice shaking. He demands that you perform your labor duties, that you spend 3 days a week working his fields for free as your ancestors did. But you look around at the empty cottages. You see the desperate need in his eyes. You realize that he needs you more than you need him. You tell him that you will work, but only for a wage. You want silver coins, and you want more of them than any peasant has ever seen. He rages, he threatens you with the stocks or the gallows, but there are no guards left to drag you away. They are all in the pits. He has no choice but to pay. This is the hidden side of the dance of death. While the skeleton leads everyone to the grave, those who manage to trip and stay on their feet find themselves in a world where the old rules are broken. You see people wearing clothes they could never have afforded before, salvaged from the abandoned homes of the wealthy. You see peasants eating meat and fine white bread because there are so few mouths left to feed. The terror of the plague is matched by a strange, frantic sort of indulgence. If tomorrow is not guaranteed, why not drink the finest ale today? Why not speak your mind to the bailiff? You witness the psychological shift of an entire generation. The blind obedience to the church begins to fray. If the priests died just as quickly as the sinners, perhaps they did not have the special protection of the divine. You begin to think for yourself. You begin to question why you were born into a life of servitude. The plague has stripped away the illusions of the feudal system, leaving only the raw reality of survival. You sit by your small hearth at night, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls. You are alive. Your hands are scarred and your belly is often empty, but you have outlived the great mortality. You have seen the dance of death with your own eyes, and you have heard the music of the rattling bones. The world you knew is gone, buried in the pits with the lords and the beggars. As the sun begins to rise over the silent fields, you stand up and walk toward the door. There is work to be done, and for the first time in history, you are the one who will set the price for it. The era of the plague has been a nightmare of blood and sorrow, but in its wake, the foundations of a new world are being laid. One where the peasant is no longer just a piece of property, but a survivor with a voice. The dance continues, but the steps are beginning to change. You wake up in the pre-dawn grayness of your cottage, but something is wrong. Your head feels as though a blacksmith is using your skull as an anvil, and your skin is slick with a cold, sticky sweat that smells of sour milk. You try to sit up, but the world tilts and spins. In the medieval world, this is the moment your life changes. There are no emergency rooms, no bottles of aspirin tucked away in a plastic cabinet, and no understanding of germs or viruses. To you, this sudden sickness is either a physical imbalance of your internal fluids or a direct message from the heavens. Your survival now depends on how you navigate the delicate, often blurry line between the apothecary and the altar. You wrap a rough wool blanket around your shivering shoulders and step out into the mud of the village lane. Your first stop is not a doctor, for a university-trained physician is a luxury for kings and high lords. Instead, you seek the local wise woman. She lives on the edge of the woods in a hut that smells perpetually of drying rosemary and damp earth. To your neighbors, she is the keeper of the old ways. She understands the language of the soil. As you sit on her wooden stool, she doesn't check your pulse with a watch. Instead, she looks at the color of your eyes and the coating on your tongue. She is checking your humors. In your world, every human body is a vessel containing 4 vital liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. You believe that when you are healthy, these 4 liquids are in a state of perfect, peaceful harmony. But when you are sick like you are now, one of them has staged a coup. Perhaps you have too much blood, making you feverish and sanguine. Or perhaps a surge of black bile has left you melancholy and sluggish. The wise woman reaches into a ceramic jar and pulls out a handful of dried feverfew and mint. She tells you to steep this in boiling water and drink it while reciting a specific prayer to St. Jude. In her world, and yours, the medicine and the prayer are not separate things. The herb is the tool, but the saint is the power behind the tool. If your fever does not break by the next sunset, you might decide it is time to visit the apothecary in the nearby market town. Walking through the town gates, you are hit by a wall of smells that are far more complex than the manure and hay of your village. You find the apothecary shop by the sign hanging over the door, perhaps a gilded mortar and pestle or a painted serpent. Inside, the walls are lined from floor to ceiling with tiny wooden drawers and glass jars filled with things that look like they belong in a dream or a nightmare. There are bundles of dried lavender, yes, but also jars of crushed beetles, powdered unicorn horn, which is likely just ground up narwhal tusk, and the dried skins of lizards. The apothecary is a man of secrets and expensive tastes. He speaks of recipes brought back from the distant east and ingredients that cost more than your entire cottage. He might suggest a theriac, a massive, complicated concoction containing over 60 different ingredients, including opium, wine, and the flesh of vipers. It is supposed to be a cure-all, a liquid shield against every poison and plague known to man. But it costs a silver penny, a sum you do not have. Instead, he sells you a small leather pouch of galbanum resin to hang around your neck and warns you to avoid the night air, which is thick with malarial vapors or miasma. You leave the shop with your pockets lighter, clutching a remedy that is more magic than science, hoping the pungent scent of the resin will ward off the invisible demons of disease. But as the days pass and your limbs grow heavier, you realize that the apothecary's jars and the wise woman's herbs might not be enough. You begin to fear that your illness is not a matter of humors, but a matter of the soul. In the medieval mind, the body and the soul are mirrors of one another. A sickness of the flesh is often seen as a physical manifestation of sin. If you have lied, if you have been greedy, or if you have neglected your tithes, God might be using this fever to call you to repentance. You drag yourself toward the parish church. The stone walls are cool and smell of beeswax and centuries of incense. This is the ultimate hospital. You do not come here for surgery, but for the intercession of the divine. You find the shrine of your local saint, a small alcove where a splinter of bone or a scrap of ancient cloth is kept in a silver reliquary. You believe that the power of the holy person still vibrates within that bone, a direct line to the ear of the Creator. You light a tallow candle, the flame flickering in the drafty nave, and you pray. You promise that if you survive, you will walk 20 miles to the great cathedral in the city. You promise to fast for a month. You are bartering with the heavens for your life. This tension between the physical and the spiritual reaches its breaking point when the great mortality, the Black Death, sweeps through your valley. Suddenly, the old systems crumble. You see the apothecary, the man who claimed to have a cure for every poison, lying dead on his own shop floor, his face turned a bruised purple. You see the priest, who told you that prayer was the ultimate shield, locking the church doors and fleeing into the woods to escape the dying. The balance you relied on is shattered. When the plague strikes, you see people turning to extreme measures. You see the flagellants marching through the streets, whipping their own backs until the stones are red, believing that by taking on the suffering of Christ, they can divert God's anger from the town. You see others turning to the dark corners of the apothecary's trade, seeking out forbidden charms or blaming their neighbors for poisoning the wells. It is a time of absolute terror, where neither the altar nor the apothecary offers a guarantee of tomorrow. Yet, even in the midst of this darkness, there is a strange kind of resilience. You see the rise of the hospitals, not as places where doctors perform miracles, but as houses of hospitality run by monks and nuns. They understand that even if they cannot cure the body, they must comfort the spirit. They provide clean hay, warm broth, and a place to die with dignity while a brother whispers the last rites. Here, medicine and faith finally sit down at the same table. The monks use their knowledge of the monastery gardens to create soothing salves, while their voices rise in Gregorian chant to soothe the panicked mind. You realize that surviving in the medieval world is not about choosing between science and religion, because those categories do not exist for you yet. Instead, it is about balance. You use the leech to draw out the bad blood because that is what the ancient books of the Greeks say to do. You wear the amulet of wormwood because your grandmother told you it keeps the pestilence away. And you kneel before the altar because you know that the world is a vast, mysterious place where the seen and the unseen are constantly dancing together. If you are lucky, your fever finally breaks on the 7th day. You wake up feeling weak, your skin cool and pale, but the anvil in your head has stopped its rhythmic pounding. You don't know if it was the wise woman's mint tea, the apothecary's resin, or the saint's intercession that saved you. Most likely, you believe it was all of them working in concert. You stand up, shaky on your feet, and walk out into the sunlight. You have survived another brush with the grave in a world where life is as fragile as a stained glass window. You go back to your fields, back to your Lord, and back to your prayers, carrying the knowledge that your body is a battlefield where the forces of the earth and the forces of the sky are always at war. As you look at the village around you, you see the scars of the struggle everywhere. You see the graves in the churchyard and the empty stalls in the market. But you also see the apothecary opening his shutters to the morning air and the priest ringing the bell for matins. The struggle for health is the struggle for life itself, and in your world, that struggle is fought with both the root and the relic. You have navigated the path between the apothecary and the altar, and for today, at least, the dance of survival continues. The door to your cottage creaks on hinges that have grown rusty from neglect. As you step out into the morning light, the first thing that hits you is not a sound, but the lack of it. For your entire life, the village has been a place of constant, overlapping noise. You were used to the shouting of children chasing geese, the rhythmic thud of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle, and the constant chatter of neighbors over garden fences. But now, as you look down the dirt track that serves as the main street, there is only a heavy, ringing stillness. This is the great silence. You walk toward the center of the village, and the world feels skewed. The thatched roof of the house next door has partially collapsed, and no one is there to mend it. A few stray dogs slink between the shadows, looking thinner and more desperate than you have ever seen them. You pass the communal well, where the wooden bucket sits dry and cracked. It is as if the pulse of the world has slowed to a crawl. But as you stand there, looking at the empty doorways and the weed-choked gardens, a realization begins to take root in your mind. It is a terrifying thought, but also a revolutionary one. You are still here. And because you are still here, the world now belongs to you in a way it never did before. The landscape you once knew is physically transforming. For generations, every inch of land was precious. The forest was kept at bay by the constant hunger for timber and pasture. But now, with so few hands left to swing axes or guide plows, you see the woods creeping back. Seedlings are sprouting in fields that have been tilled since the time of your great-grandparents. Brambles are wrapping their thorny fingers around the stone walls of abandoned sheepfolds. In the distance, you see the Lord's manor house, its chimneys cold and its gatehouse unmanned. The natural world is reclaiming the spaces where humanity has retreated, and for a peasant like you, this shift in the environment marks the beginning of a profound shift in power. You start to walk toward the fields, but you are not heading for your own small strip of land. You are heading toward the best land in the parish, the fertile soil near the river that was always reserved for the Lord. In years past, if you had even set foot on this ground without permission, you would have faced a heavy fine or a stint in the stocks. Today, there is no one to stop you. The bailiff is dead, the steward has fled to the city, and the Lord himself is shuttered behind his stone walls, terrified of the very air he breathes. You look at the rich, dark earth and realize that the old rules of land and blood have been shaken to their core. This is the era of the survivor's labor. Before the plague, there were too many people and too little land. You were replaceable. If you died or walked away, there were 10 hungry men waiting to take your place for a pittance. But now the math has flipped. There are too few people and too much work to be done. You are no longer a disposable cog in the feudal machine. You are a precious commodity. You feel a strange new sense of weight in your own limbs. Your hands, calloused and scarred by years of toil, are now worth more than the gold coins sitting uselessly in the Lord's chest. As you reach the village square, you see a few other survivors emerging. You gather in a small group, speaking in hushed tones. The conversation is unlike any you have ever had. Usually, you would be discussing how to pay the upcoming tallage or how to hide a bit of grain from the tithe collector. Now, the talk is about wages. You hear that in the next village over, the peasants refused to harvest the hay unless they were paid twice their usual rate. You hear stories of men who have simply packed their bags and walked away from their ancestral homes, heading for the towns where labor is in such high demand that no one asks where you came from or who your master is. This mobility is a brand new shadow over the old world. For centuries, you were tied to the land, bound by law and custom to the soil where you were born. But the great silence has broken those chains. You realize that if the Lord wants his harvest brought in before it rots in the rain, he is going to have to negotiate with you. He is going to have to talk to you not as a piece of property, but as a person with something he desperately needs. This realization brings a flicker of a smile to your face, a grim and quiet satisfaction that tastes better than any bread you have ever eaten. Speaking of bread, the way you eat is changing too. In the old days, your belly was filled with dark, heavy rye bread, often stretched with peas or beans to make it last. Meat was a rare luxury, reserved for the greatest feast days. But look around you now. With so many families gone, there are more livestock than there are people to eat them. You find yourself sitting down to a meal of beef and mutton. You are eating white bread made from fine wheat, the kind of food that used to be the exclusive privilege of the wealthy. You are even drinking better ale, brewed with more malt and less water because the ingredients are suddenly plentiful for those who remain. This change in your diet is more than just a physical comfort. It is a sign that the hierarchy of the world is crumbling. When you sit in the tavern and see your neighbors wearing better wool, perhaps even a scrap of silk or a silver buckle they found in an empty house, you see the visible evidence of a social earthquake. The lords are terrified of this. They see you eating their food and wearing clothes that they believe are above your station, and they try to fight back. They pass laws like the Statute of Laborers, demanding that wages return to what they were before the sickness. They try to forbid you from wearing certain colors or fabrics. They want to force the world back into the shape it had before the silence fell. But as you listen to the herald read these new laws in the market square, you see the people around you laughing under their breath. How can they enforce these laws when there are no guards to catch you? How can they demand you work for old wages when the wheat is falling over in the fields and the birds are eating the Lord's profit? The old world was built on the idea that everyone had a fixed place, ordained by God and nature. But you have seen that place vanish. You have seen the high and mighty die just as quickly as the poor. You have seen that the sun still rises and the rain still falls even when the social order is turned upside down. The great silence is not just an absence of noise. It is a space where a new kind of identity is being forged. You are beginning to think of yourself not just as a servant of the manor, but as an individual with a future that you might actually have a hand in shaping. You walk back toward your cottage as the sun begins to set, and the shadows of the empty houses stretch long across the road. It is still a lonely world, and the grief for those you lost still sits like a cold stone in your chest. But as you look at the reclaiming forest and the ripening fields, you feel a surge of defiant energy. The lords might try to reclaim their power, and the church might try to explain away the horror with sermons on sin and repentance, but they cannot unmake what you have seen. You have seen the world go quiet, and in that silence you heard the sound of your own voice for the first time. You are a survivor of the greatest catastrophe your world has ever known, and as you bank the fire in your hearth tonight, you are not just preparing for another day of survival. You are preparing to claim your share of this new, empty, and strangely beautiful world. The dance of survival has changed its rhythm, and for the first time in history, you are the one leading the steps. You are no longer just a ghost in the landscape. You are the architect of what comes next. The air in the village feels thin. It is not because of the altitude or the weather, but because of the silence. You stand at the edge of the commons, looking out over fields that were once a tapestry of activity. In your father's time, This valley hummed with the sound of 100 voices, the rhythmic thud of axes, and the constant chatter of families working side by side. Now, the wind carries only the sound of tall grass brushing against the stone walls of empty cottages. The great mortality has passed through like a scythe, and the world it left behind is unrecognizable. You are one of the few who remain. Your hands are still calloused, your back is still bowed from years of service, and the smell of damp earth still clings to your wool tunic. But as you look toward the manor house on the hill, you feel something you have never felt before. You feel necessary. For centuries, the logic of your world was simple and suffocating. There were many of you and very few of them, because there were so many hungry mouths and so many hands reaching for the plow. Your life was cheap. The lord of the manor held all the cards because he held the land, and land was the only thing that mattered. You worked his domain for 3 days a week just for the right to scratch a living out of a small garden plot. You paid him when you ground your grain, when you brewed your ale, and even when your daughter married. You were tied to the soil, a human fixture of the landscape, as fixed as the old oak tree in the village square. But the plague changed the math. The plague did not care about social hierarchy. It took the plowman and the priest, the reaper and the reeve. And in doing so, it turned the economy of Europe upside down. You walk toward the manor house today, not with your head down in a gesture of habitual submission, but with a steady gaze. The Lord is waiting for you. He is desperate. His wheat is ripening in the sun, and if it is not harvested within the week, it will rot in the stalks. In years past, he would have simply ordered the village to the fields under the threat of the bailiff's whip or a heavy fine in the manorial court. But today, the bailiff is dead, and half the village is buried in the churchyard. The Lord needs you more than you need him. For the first time in your life, you have something that is in short supply. You have labor. As you approach the heavy wooden doors of the hall, you think about the news that has been traveling along the dusty roads. Travelers tell stories of peasants in the next county who simply walked away. They left their ancestral homes and their obligations behind, heading for the cities or for other manors where the lords were offering actual silver coins for a day's work. This was unthinkable a generation ago. To leave your manor was to become an outlaw, a man without a master, a stray animal in the eyes of the law. But now every lord is looking for stray animals. They are competing for you. When you speak to the Lord, the conversation is different. He tries to invoke the old ways, the sacred duties of the tenant to the master. He speaks of tradition and the natural order of the world. You listen, but you also look at his unharvested fields. You mention that the Lord 3 miles to the west is offering 4 pence a day and a meal of meat and ale for anyone who can handle a scythe. You see the flash of anger in the Lord's eyes, but it is quickly replaced by a shadow of fear. He cannot afford to lose you. If you leave, his wealth stays in the ground. He grumbles, he curses the changing times, and he calls you ungrateful. But in the end, he reaches into his purse. He offers you a wage, not just a reduction in your labor service, but cold, hard silver. This is the birth of the free laborer. You are no longer just a body tied to a specific plot of earth. You are a participant in a market. This shift is subtle at first, a series of small negotiations in thousands of villages across the continent. But it is the sound of the feudal system cracking at its foundation. You return to your cottage that evening with a strange sensation in your chest. It is the weight of silver in your pocket and the realization that the world is wider than it used to be. However, the ruling class does not give up their power easily. As you go about your work in the weeks that follow, you hear of the king's new laws. In England, they call it the Statute of Labourers. The Parliament of Lords and Bishops, terrified by the rising cost of help and the newfound boldness of people like you, has decreed that wages must return to what they were before the plague. They have made it a crime to ask for more. They have made it a crime for a lord to pay more. They want to freeze time, to force the world back into the shape it held before the graves were dug. They want to make it illegal for you to be anything other than a servant. You see the royal officials riding into the village with their parchment scrolls. They look at your new shoes, made of better leather than you ever owned before, and they see a rebellion. They look at the fact that you are eating white bread instead of the dark, gritty rye that was the lot of your ancestors, and they see an affront to God's intended order. To them, your survival and your modest prosperity are a threat to the stability of the universe. They pass laws telling you what you can wear, forbidding you from wearing furs or certain colors that were once reserved for the gentry. They want to use the law to put you back in your place. But the law cannot harvest the wheat. The law cannot shear the sheep. No matter how many decrees the king signs, the reality of the empty village remains. Every time a lord tries to enforce the low wages, he finds his neighbors secretly offering more under the table to lure his workers away. The economic reality is a flood that the wooden walls of legislation cannot hold back. You learn to navigate this new landscape. You learn to be mobile. You realize that if your lord is too cruel or too stingy, you can disappear in the night and find a new life 20 miles away where no one knows your name or your status. This mobility is a revolution in itself. For the first time, the peasant is a traveler. You meet others on the road, men and women who have left their lords and are looking for the best deal. You share stories of different manners, of which masters are fair and which are tyrants. You begin to see yourselves not just as members of a single village, but as a class of people with shared interests. You realize that while a single peasant can be crushed, 1,000 peasants moving as one can change the course of history. Think about the physical reality of this change. Imagine sitting in a tavern, a place that was once a rare luxury, and ordering a cup of strong ale paid for with your own earnings. You look around at the other faces in the room. There is a sense of nervous excitement. You are living in a world where the old rules are broken, but the new rules have not yet been written. You are the architect of your own day. You decide when to work and for whom. The plow is still heavy, and the work is still grueling, but the power in the plow has shifted. It is no longer just a tool of your servitude. It is the lever you use to pry your freedom from the hands of the elite. This era, often called the golden age of the laborer, changes the very fabric of the countryside. Because you have more money, you spend more. You buy better tools, better clothes, and better food. This demand stimulates the growth of small towns and markets. The local blacksmith is busier than ever. The weaver has more orders than he can handle. The wealth that was once concentrated in the stone towers of the manor house is beginning to trickle down into the thatched cottages of the workers. You see the landscape changing. Some lords, unable to find enough workers to till their lands, give up on farming altogether. They turn their fields into pastures for sheep, which require fewer hands to manage. This creates a new industry of wool, further changing the economy and providing even more opportunities for those who know how to navigate the new world. You walk back to your home as the sun sets, the long shadows stretching across the valley. You pass the church where the bells are ringing for vespers. You think of your grandfather who lived and died within 5 miles of this spot, never knowing the taste of meat more than once a year, never owning more than the clothes on his back. His life was a cycle of duty and debt. Your life is still hard, and there are many dangers ahead. The lords are angry, the tax collectors are greedy, and the threat of war or another wave of sickness is always present. But as you feel the weight of the silver in your hand and the strength in your arms, you know that the old world is gone. You are no longer a servant of the soil. You are a master of your own labor. The path ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in history, the path belongs to you. You stand at the edge of a field that was once thick with the golden sway of wheat but now sits choked with weeds and the skeletal remains of last season's stalks. For a few years, the world felt as though it had tipped in your favor. The great mortality had cleared the stage, and those of you who remained found yourselves holding a power you never dreamed possible. You were the survivors. You were the hands that the kingdom needed to keep from starving. You have tasted higher wages, and you have felt the strange, terrifying thrill of walking away from a lord who refused to pay you what you were worth. You have perhaps even moved to a new village, shedding the name of your father and the debt of your birth like a tattered cloak. But as you look down the road, you see something that makes the blood in your veins run cold. It is not a plague doctor or a funeral cart. It is a man on horseback, dressed in fine silks that shimmer in the morning sun, carrying a roll of parchment sealed with heavy, red wax. This is the law, and the law has come to put you back in your place. The lords of the land have had enough of your newfound confidence. They have watched their profits wither as their fields go unplowed. They have listened with boiling blood to the stories of peasants demanding 3 times their usual pay or, worse, refusing to work altogether unless they are fed meat and fine ale. To the nobility, this is not just an economic crisis. It is a collapse of the divine order. They believe God intended for them to rule and for you to serve, and they are prepared to use every ounce of their remaining power to snap the world back into its old shape. In England, the year is 1351, and the air is thick with the news of the statute of laborers. You hear the town crier shouting the words in the village square, and each sentence feels like a link in a chain being wrapped around your ankles. The law is clear and unforgiving. It decrees that every man and woman under the age of 60 who does not have a craft or their own land must work for whoever requires them. And here is the blow that stings the most. You are forbidden from accepting any wage higher than what was paid 5 years ago, before the plague began. Think about that for a moment as you stand in the mud. The world has changed. The cost of basic tools has risen. The price of iron for your plow and salt for your meat has climbed because the blacksmiths and traders are fewer now. Yet, the law demands that your time and your sweat be frozen in the past. If you are caught asking for more, or if a neighbor is caught paying you more, you both face heavy fines. If you attempt to flee to the next county to find a better deal, you are no longer a worker looking for a life. You are a fugitive. You are a masterless man. And in the eyes of the lords, that is the most dangerous thing you can be. You might think you can simply slip away under the cover of night, but the shackles are tightening in ways that are not just physical. The lords have introduced the use of the branding iron. If you are caught as a runaway laborer, you might find the hot sting of metal against your forehead, leaving the letter F burned into your skin forever. F for falsity. F for fugitive. It is a mark that tells every person you meet that you tried to claim your own life, and that the law has claimed it back. The control does not stop at your wages or your movement. It follows you into your very home, right to your dinner table and the chest where you keep your clothes. The lords are disgusted by the sight of you. They see you walking the streets in shoes that have points at the toes, or wearing a tunic made of better wool than a peasant should own. They see you eating white bread and drinking spiced ale, things that were once the exclusive privilege of the elite. To them, this is a visual rebellion. If a peasant looks like a merchant, and a merchant looks like a knight, how is anyone to know who is who? And so they bring forth the sumptuary laws. These are rules designed to regulate your very appearance. You are told exactly what fabrics you are allowed to wear. No silk, no gold thread, and certainly no expensive furs like ermine or sable. You are restricted to the coarsest cloths, the browns and grays of the earth you till. Even the amount of food you serve at a wedding or a feast is now subject to the watchful eye of the law. They want to look at you and see a servant. They want to ensure that even if you have a few extra coins in your pocket, you can never truly escape the shadow of your station. Imagine the resentment simmering in your chest as you listen to these decrees. You remember the nights you spent nursing the dying. You remember the fear and the way you kept working even as the world fell apart. You feel that you earned this better life through the sheer luck of surviving a literal apocalypse. But the men in the high stone towers do not care about your survival. They care about their own comfort, their own prestige, and the ancient rights they believe they hold over your body. The enforcers of these laws are not distant soldiers. They are often men, you know. The justices of the peace have been given new, sweeping powers to hunt down those who violate the statutes. These are local landowners, the very people who have the most to gain by keeping your wages low. They sit in judgment over you, acting as both the accuser and the judge. There is no fairness in this court. There is only the preservation of the status quo. You see the tension building in the eyes of your neighbors. In the dark corners of the alehouse, the talk is no longer about the weather or the harvest. It is about the unfairness of it all. People whisper about the Great Society, a growing feeling of solidarity among the common folk. You hear stories of villages that have refused to pay the fines, or groups of laborers who have banded together to protect a runaway comrade from the bailiffs. The lords think they are restoring order, but they are actually sowing the seeds of something much more volatile. Every time a bailiff seizes a pig because a widow couldn't pay the labor fine, the anger grows. Every time a young man is put in the stocks for wanting an extra penny a day, the fire spreads. The lords are trying to hold back the tide of history with nothing but parchment and iron, but the tide is rising faster than they can build their walls. They are forgetting that there are fewer of them now too, and that a lord without the consent of his people is just a man in a very expensive, very lonely house. You walk back to your small hut as the sun begins to set, the weight of the day pressing down on your shoulders. You look at your hands, calloused and stained with the dirt of the field. Under the old laws, those hands belonged to the lord of the manor. For a brief, shining moment after the plague, you thought they belonged to you. Now, the king and his council are trying to buy them back for a price that belongs to a dead world. The atmosphere in the village is heavy, like the air before a summer thunderstorm. You know that you cannot go back to the way things were in 1346. You have seen too much. You have felt the freedom of movement and the power of being needed. The shackles might be real, and the statutes might be written in the finest ink, but they cannot erase the memory of what it feels like to be worth something. As you blow out the small tallow candle in your home, you hear the distant sound of a horn or perhaps just the wind howling through the empty manors of the dead. The lords think they have won. They think the law is the final word. But as you close your eyes, you know that a piece of paper cannot feed a hungry child, and a branding iron cannot stop a man who has nothing left to lose. The strike back from the nobility has begun, but the response from the people is brewing in every field, every forge, and every heart across the land. The battle for the soul of the Middle Ages is no longer about surviving the plague. It is about surviving the peace. You stand in the middle of a dusty road in the village of Famine, Essex. It is late May in the year 1381. The air is thick with the scent of turned earth and the impending heat of a humid summer. But there is something else in the air today. It is not the usual quiet rhythm of the countryside, the lowing of cattle, or the rhythmic thud of a woodcutter's axe. It is a low, vibrating hum of human voices. These are voices that have transitioned over the last few months from whispers behind closed barn doors to a roar that is beginning to shake the very foundations of the Kingdom of England. You are a plowman, or perhaps a tanner, or a woman who has spent her life spinning wool until her fingers were raw and stained. You are one of the survivors. You lived through the great mortality 3 decades ago. You saw the world end and then begin again. Because of that, you know something your grandfather never did. You know your own worth. You have seen that when there are fewer hands to do the work, those hands become more valuable. And yet, for all your hard work, you feel the weight of a thumb pressing down on your neck. You are tired of being treated like a beast of burden by men who have never felt the grit of soil under their fingernails. For years, you have watched the lords and the king's advisors try to turn back the clock. They passed the statute of laborers to keep your wages low, demanding you work for the same pittance your ancestors accepted before the plague. They told you that you could not move to find better work. They even told you what you were allowed to eat and what cheap, coarse cloth you were allowed to wear. You felt the noose tightening. And now, the final straw has arrived in the form of the king's tax collectors. This is the 3rd poll tax in just 4 years. The crown is broke from the long wars in France, and they want you to pay for it. But this tax is different. It is not based on how much land you own or how many sheep you have. It is a flat rate, 1 shilling for every soul over the age of 15. To a wealthy merchant in London, a shilling is the price of a fine bottle of wine. To you, it is the difference between a winter of survival and a winter of starvation. You see him now. John Bampton, the royal commissioner, has arrived in the nearby town of Brentwood. He sits on a fine, high-stepping horse, surrounded by clerks with their parchment scrolls and guards with their polished polearms. He is here to demand the unpaid taxes from your village and the neighboring ones. You watch as Thomas Baker of Fobbing stands before him. Baker does not reach for his purse. He stands tall, his feet planted firmly in the mud. He tells Bampton that your village has already paid what it owes and will not give another penny. You see the shock on the official's face. He is not used to being told no by a man in a tunic. He orders his guards to arrest the villagers, but the atmosphere snaps. You find yourself moving forward with the crowd. You have no sword, but you have your heavy wooden staff and a lifetime of pent-up rage. Bampton and his men are forced to flee, leaving their scrolls behind. In that moment, the world changes. There is no going back now. To defy the king's tax collector is treason, and the punishment is death. Since you are already marked for the gallows, you decide you might as well finish what you started. The fire has been lit, and it is spreading through Essex and Kent like a summer blaze through dry wheat. As you march toward London, your numbers grow. You are no longer just a few angry villagers. You are an army of the common people. You are joined by thousands of others who have their own grievances. You hear the name Wat Tyler shouted from the front of the line. He is a man of Kent, a man who knows how to lead and how to speak. He represents the steel of the rebellion. And then there is the priest John Ball. He has been in and out of the Archbishop's prisons for years because he dares to preach a dangerous truth that the Church tries to hide. You stand in a massive field at Blackheath, just outside the city of London, and listen to John Ball's voice carry over the heads of the multitude. He asks a question that rings in your ears and settles in your heart. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? He tells you that, in the beginning, all people were created equal by God. He tells you that the bondage of serfdom is a sin against heaven, and that the great lords are like weeds that must be plucked from the Garden of England. You look at the calloused palms of your hands and you believe him. You feel a sense of purpose you have never known. You are not just a rebel. You are an instrument of divine justice. The gates of London open for you, not because you broke them down with a battering ram, but because the common people of the city share your heart. The apprentices, the cooks, and the porters of London see you as their brothers. You walk across London Bridge, and the sight is overwhelming. The city is a maze of timber-framed houses, leaning over narrow alleys that smell of river mud, exotic spices, and coal smoke. You see the great palace of the Savoy, the home of John of Gaunt. He is the king's uncle and the man you blame for the taxes and the corruption of the realm. You do not go to the palace to steal. Wat Tyler has made it clear that you are seekers of truth and liberty, not common thieves. You carry the heavy furniture, the silk tapestries, and the fine clothes out into the street and set them on fire. You take the gold and silver vessels and smash them into dust, throwing them into the Thames. You want to destroy the physical manifestations of the power that has kept you in the dirt. You are purging the kingdom of its sickness. Eventually, you find yourself outside the Tower of London. The great white fortress usually looms over the city as a symbol of inescapable royal power. But today, the drawbridge is down. The king is inside, but his guards seem paralyzed by the sheer size of your crowd. You and your fellows swarm inside the stone walls. You find the Archbishop of Canterbury, Simon Sudbury, and the treasurer Robert Hales, praying in the chapel. To you, they are the architects of your misery. You drag them out to Tower Hill while the sun glints off the river. The air is filled with a terrifying roar of shouting. You watch as they are executed. It is a moment of dizzying, terrifying realization. The old world is breaking. The highest men in the land have fallen to the hands of those they once ignored. The king, the young boy Richard, who is only 14 years old, realizes he cannot hide any longer. He agrees to meet your leaders at a place called Mile End. You watch as he rides out on a white horse. He is small and pale, but he wears the crown, and he represents the only authority you still respect. You believe that the king is good, but that he has been misled by evil advisors. Your leaders demand that serfdom be abolished forever. They demand that land be rented for a fair price of 4 pennies an acre, and that every man and woman shall be free to work wherever they choose. To your amazement, the boy king agrees. He tells you that it will be done. He promises to give you written charters of freedom stamped with his own royal seal. You cheer until your throat is raw. You feel a weight lift off your shoulders that you have carried since the day you were born. You have won. You have changed the history of your world. But the final meeting is at Smithfield, and the mood there is different. You are tired, and many of your fellows have already started the long walk back to their villages, clutching their precious scraps of parchment. Wat Tyler rides forward to speak with Richard once more. He is bold, perhaps too bold, fueled by the success of the last few days. He asks for a drink of water and rinses his mouth in front of the king. He demands that all laws be abolished except for the law of the land, and that the wealth of the church be divided among the people. You see the mayor of London, William Walworth, grow red with rage at this perceived insult to the king's dignity. A scuffle breaks out in the dust between the two lines of men. A dagger flashes in the sun. You watch in horror as Wat Tyler is struck down. He falls from his horse, his blood soaking into the Smithfield dirt. For a heartbeat, the thousands of you draw your bows and level your pikes. The air is tense enough to snap. You are ready to kill the king and every nobleman with him. But then, the 14-year-old Richard does something no one expected. He spurs his horse forward, riding directly toward your front line. He holds up his hand and shouts for you to hear. He tells you that Tyler was a traitor. He tells you not to fear. He says, "I am your king, and I will be your captain." He tells you to follow him into the fields. In your confusion, your exhaustion, and your deeply ingrained loyalty to the crown, you follow. You want to believe him. You need to believe that your king has chosen you over the lords. But as you are led away from the city, the trap begins to close. The knights and the professional soldiers are gathering. In the weeks that follow, the promises are broken one by one. The charters of freedom are declared null and void. The king's messengers go out into the countryside, not with news of liberty, but with ropes for the gallows. Richard famously tells the people of Essex that rustics they were and rustics they shall remain in bondage. But even worse than before, you find yourself back in your village, hiding in the woods or working your field in a heavy, fearful silence as the lords reclaim their power with a vengeance. John Ball is executed. What Tyler's head is placed on a spike on London Bridge to rot in the wind. It seems as though everything you fought for has vanished like mist. But as you sit by your hearth at night, you know better. You have seen the king tremble. You have seen the great tower fall. The lords are afraid now. They know that if they push you too hard, the fire will return. Slowly, over the next few decades, the world you wanted begins to arrive anyway. Wages continue to rise because the lords have no choice but to pay them. Serfdom begins to wither away, not by a royal decree, but because the system is broken and cannot be mended. You have survived the plague, the famine, and the rebellion. You walk back to your cottage as the sun sets over the fields. You are still a peasant, but the world remembers your name. You have shown them that the people who feed the kingdom can also bring it to its knees. You step out from the smoke of your hearth and the heavy labor of the harvest into a world that is vibrating with the unseen. For you, the peasant, the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual realm is not a wall. It is a thin, permeable veil. You do not just believe in the supernatural. You breathe it. It is as real to you as the dirt under your fingernails or the ache in your lower back. In this era, there is no such thing as a secular life. Every action you take, from planting a seed to baking a loaf of bread, is wrapped in a layer of ritual and prayer. This is your spiritual armor. Without it, the world is too terrifying to endure. With it, you have a chance to negotiate with the forces that control your fate. Imagine the church at the heart of your village. It is likely the only stone building you will ever enter. When you walk through those doors, you leave the mud and the smells of the sty behind. You look up and see walls covered in vibrant, terrifying, and beautiful paintings. You cannot read a single word of the Latin the priest intones, but you can read those walls. You see the scales of justice weighing souls. You see the gaping, toothy maw of a monster representing the gates of hell. You see the gentle face of the Virgin Mary offering a mantle of protection. These images are your books. They tell you that while your life on earth is short and full of toil, you are a soldier in a cosmic drama. But the high religion of the cathedrals is only half of your story. Your spirituality is a practical, earthy thing. You do not just pray for your soul. You pray for your cows. You pray for the rain to stop before the wheat rots. You pray for the swelling in your child's throat to go down. To help with this, you have the saints. To you, the saints are not distant historical figures. They are like powerful celestial neighbors. They have specialties, and you approach them with the same mixture of respect and negotiation you might use with a local lord. If you have a toothache, you pray to Saint Apollonia. If your eyes are failing, you call upon Saint Lucy. When the plague arrives and the skin begins to darken and swell, you desperately seek the favor of Saint Roch, who is always pictured showing the sore on his thigh, or Saint Sebastian, who survived a forest of arrows. You might carry a small scrap of parchment with a prayer written on it, even if you cannot read it. You might sew a tiny relic, perhaps a piece of cloth that touched a holy bone, into the lining of your tunic. You feel the weight of it against your skin. It is a physical shield against a physical threat. You also live in a world of sound. The church bells are not just for telling time. When a massive summer storm rolls over the hills, threatening to flatten your crops with hail, the ringers rush to the tower. You believe the consecrated sound of those bells can literally shatter the clouds and drive away the demons of the air who ride the lightning. You stand in your doorway, crossing yourself with every peal, watching the dark sky and hoping the sacred bronze is loud enough to protect your livelihood. However, your spiritual life has a shadow side. The priest tells you that all power comes from God, but you know that the woods and the old wells hold their own secrets. When the official prayers do not seem to work, or when you need a more immediate remedy, you look toward the fringe of the village. You visit the woman who knows the properties of the herbs growing in the shade of the hedgerows. You visit the man who can charm a hive of bees or find a lost silver spoon. The church calls this sorcery, but to you it is just common sense. It is the old wisdom passed down from your grandmother. You see no contradiction in hanging a bundle of St. John's wort over your door to keep out witches, while also keeping a bottle of holy water from the Easter feast on your shelf. You might use a specific rhyme or a backwards prayer to cure a fever. You might bury a piece of iron under your threshold to keep the restless dead from wandering back into your kitchen. These are the tools of survival. If the Lord of Heaven is too busy with the affairs of kings, you will turn to the spirits of the earth to keep your family safe. This blend of faith and folklore becomes your primary defense when the great tragedies strike. Imagine the year the rains do not stop. The fields turn to a gray slurry of rotting stalks. The hunger begins as a dull ache and grows into a screaming void in your stomach. In such times, despair is your greatest enemy. You watch your neighbors wither. You see children with hollow eyes. In this darkness, you do not just see a weather pattern. You see a spiritual crisis. Perhaps the village has sinned. Perhaps the local saint is angry because his shrine has been neglected. You go on a procession. You and every soul in the parish walk barefoot through the muddy lanes, carrying the wooden statue of your patron saint on your shoulders. You sing litanies that your ancestors sang hundreds of years ago. You are begging for mercy. This act of collective movement gives you a sense of agency. You are not just a victim of the clouds. You are doing something. You are participating in a grand negotiation with the divine. Even if the sun does not come out the next day, the act of walking together, of chanting in unison, stitches the community back together when it is fraying at the seams. Then comes the greatest test of all, the Black Death. This is a horror that your spiritual armor was never designed to deflect. You see the priest fall. You see the most pious woman in the village die in agony. The old rules seem to break. Some people around you fall into a different kind of spiritual fever. You might see the flagellants passing through a nearby town, men and women who whip themselves until the blood flows, believing that by taking the punishment of the world onto their own backs, they can appease a God who seems to have turned his face away. You might feel the temptation to give up, to wallow in the filth and wait for the end. But for many of you, the rituals become even more vital. When there are no more priests left to hear your final confession, you are told that you can confess to one another, even to a woman or a neighbor. This is a radical shift. It places the power of salvation directly into your calloused hands. You hold the hand of your dying friend and listen to their sins. You offer them the comfort of a prayer. In the absence of the hierarchy, your local community becomes its own sanctuary. The afterlife is never far from your thoughts. It is the ultimate destination that makes the present misery bearable. You believe in purgatory, a place of cleansing fire where you will pay for your earthly failings before reaching the light. This belief gives you a strange kind of comfort. It means that the dead are not truly gone. They are just in another room, and you can still help them. You save your meager copper coins to pay for a candle or a mass for your father's soul. You feel a sense of duty that stretches beyond the grave. This connection to the ancestors provides a profound sense of continuity. You are a link in a chain that cannot be broken by famine or plague. You find joy in the spiritual calendar as well. Life is not all gloom and penance. Your year is punctuated by feast days. These are the moments when the spiritual armor feels light and golden. On the feast of St. John, you dance around massive bonfires, jumping through the flames for luck. At Christmas, you bring the greenery of the forest into the house, a remnant of older ways to celebrate the returning of the light. These festivals are your release valves. They are the times when the heavy burden of being a peasant is lifted, and you are allowed to feast, to drink, and to feel the presence of the holy in the taste of a rare piece of meat or the sweetness of an ale. In the end, your saints and your sorcery are what keep you sane. They provide a narrative for your suffering. When the Lord takes too much grain or the plague takes your youngest son, you do not see a random, cold universe. You see a world of meaning. You see a struggle between light and dark, and you know which side you are on. Your spiritual armor is not made of steel. It is made of stories, of gestures, of shared songs, and the unshakable belief that you are seen by eyes that look down from the stars. This inner world is the one place where the lords have no true power over you. It is your ultimate fortress, and it is how you find the strength to wake up every morning and face the cold, gray dawn once again. You stand at the edge of the village green, looking up the long, winding path that leads to the stone gatehouse of the manor. For generations, this view represented the absolute center of your universe. The manor was the source of law, the source of protection, and the source of the heavy, crushing weight of tradition that dictated every single hour of your life. But today, as you look at the gray stones and the heavy oak doors, something feels different. The air carries the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, just as it always has, but the silence that hangs over the valley is heavier now. It is the silence of a world that has broken and is failing to put itself back together. You remember how it used to be. You remember when the fields were a meticulously organized patchwork of strips, every inch of soil accounted for, every peasant bound to their plot by invisible chains of duty and blood. The lord of the manor was a figure of distant, terrifying power, a man whose word could determine whether your family ate or starved. You bowed your head when his steward rode past, and you spent half your week sweating in the Lord's private fields before you were even allowed to touch your own. That was the great chain of being. That was the way God intended the world to work. The knight fought, the priest prayed, and you worked. But then came the great mortality. You watched as the plague tore through the hovels and the high halls alike, showing no more mercy to the man in silk than it did to the man in burlap. You saw the village population vanish by half, then more. You saw the priest stop praying because he was dead, and you saw the knight stop fighting because he had no men left to lead. And now, as you walk past the village church toward the manor, you see the physical evidence of a system that is rotting from the inside out. Look at the fields to your left. They are not the neat, golden waves of grain you remember from your childhood. They are choked with thistles and brambles. The drainage ditches, once maintained by a small army of laborers, are clogged with silt and fallen leaves, turning the low ground into a stagnant marsh. You see a plow abandoned in the middle of a furrow, its wooden frame silvered by the sun and cracked by the frost, its iron share rusting into the dirt. There is no one to pull it. There are no oxen left to yoke, and no men left to guide them. As you reach the manor gate, you notice that the great stone walls are missing patches of mortar. A few stones have tumbled from the top of the wall and lie where they fell in the tall grass. In the old days, the steward would have had you and 10 other men out here within the hour to repair the damage. He would have cited the ancient customs of the manor, reminding you that it was your duty to maintain the Lord's defenses. But today, the steward stays inside. He knows better than to ask. If he pushes you too hard, if he threatens you with the stocks or a fine, he knows you might just leave. This is the most terrifying and exhilarating thought you have ever had. The idea of leaving was once unthinkable. To leave the manor was to become an outlaw, a man without a master, a stray dog in a world of wolves. But now you realize that every manor for 50 miles is crying out for hands. You have heard whispers from travelers that the lords in the next county are so desperate for workers that they are offering silver coins for a day's labor. They are offering to forget that you ever belonged to someone else. They are offering you the one thing your ancestors never had: a choice. You walk into the courtyard, and you see the Lord himself standing on the steps of his hall. He looks smaller than he used to. His clothes are still fine, but they are frayed at the cuffs. He is arguing with his bailiff, and you can hear the frustration in his voice. He is talking about the statute of laborers, that new law passed by the king far away in London. The law says that wages must stay at the levels they were before the plague. It says that you are forbidden from asking for more. It says that no man can refuse to work for his traditional master. You feel a cold, hard knot of defiance in your chest. The king can write whatever he likes on his parchment, but the king is not here in the mud with you. The king cannot make the corn grow by decree, and he cannot bring the dead plowmen back to life. You know that the Lord needs your strong back and your knowledge of the soil more than you need his protection. The wolves are still out there, yes, but the Lord's walls are crumbling, and his sword is getting heavy in his hand. The old world died when the labor became more valuable than the land. For centuries, land was everything. If you had land, you had power. But now, there is plenty of land and very few people to work it. The balance has shifted. You see it in the way the bailiff looks at you when you approach. He doesn't sneer anymore. There is a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. He is wondering if you are here to work, or if you are here to tell him that you are moving on. You walk past them toward the granary, and you see the cracks in the foundation. The Lord cannot afford to fix it. He is selling off his horses one by one. He is leasing out the home farm, the land he used to keep for his own profit, because he can no longer find enough serfs to farm it for free. He is turning from a master of men into a mere landlord, a man who collects rent instead of commanding lives. It is a subtle shift, but it is the sound of 1,000 years of history snapping like a dry twig. You think about the village meetings held in secret behind the tavern. You and the other survivors have realized that you have a power that your grandfathers could never have imagined. You have begun to talk about rights. You have begun to talk about the fact that the soil is the same whether you work it as a servant or a free man. You've heard stories of peasants in other places rising up, burning the manor rolls, those thick books of parchment that record who owes what service and who belongs to which lord. You imagine the feeling of watching those rolls turn to ash, seeing the ink of your bondage disappear into the smoke. The immersive weight of the past is still there, of course. You still feel the habit of deference. You still feel the fear of the divine order. But as you look at the crumbling manor, you realize that the divine order seems to be changing its mind. If God intended you to be a slave forever, why did he take away the masters and leave the workers? Why did he leave the fields empty and the granaries quiet? You reach the edge of the Lord's garden. Once, it was a place of clipped hedges and rare herbs, a symbol of man's mastery over nature. Now the roses have gone wild, their thorns reaching out to snag the Lord's fine wool coat. The gravel paths are hidden under a carpet of moss. It is beautiful in a way, but it is the beauty of a graveyard. It is the physical manifestation of the end of an era. The manor is no longer a fortress of order. It is a weight that the Lord can no longer carry. You turn away from the manor and look back down at the village. You see your own small house, its thatch newly repaired with straw you bought with your own wages. You see your neighbor, a man who was once a landless laborer, but who now rents 20 acres of the Lord's best soil for a modest fee. The world is becoming a place of contracts and coins rather than oaths and blood. You realize that you are no longer just a part of the landscape, like a tree or a stone. You are a person with a price. It is a cold kind of freedom, and it is dangerous. But as you watch the sun set behind the leaning towers of the manor house, you know there is no going back. The old walls are falling, and for the first time in your life you are not afraid of the ruins. You are looking past them, toward a horizon that is wider than it has ever been before. The old world is dying, and you are the one who will inherit the earth that remains. You take a deep breath of the evening air, feel the calluses on your hands, and begin the walk home, leaving the crumbling manor to the shadows of the past. You feel the cool dampness of the evening mist clinging to your woolen tunic as you step onto the narrow dirt path that leads away from the manor. The heavy wooden gates of the Lord's estate are behind you, and the only sound is the rhythmic thud of your own footsteps on the earth. This earth is not just dirt and stone. To you, it is a living thing, a silent witness to every struggle and every small victory your family has claimed over the centuries. You are walking through a landscape that has been shaped by the hands of people just like you, people who refuse to be broken by the weight of the world. As you look toward the cluster of thatched roofs that make up your village, you begin to realize that your survival is not merely a matter of luck. It is a calculated, collective effort. The legacy you carry is not written in gold or etched in marble, but it is carved into the very structure of the society that will one day rise from these fields. You represent a lineage of resilience that has outlasted empires and survived the very wrath of nature itself. Think for a moment about the concept of the commons. You walk past a stretch of meadow where the village sheep are grazing. This land belongs to no one man, yet it belongs to everyone. This idea, the right of the common people to access the resources of the earth, is one of the most powerful legacies your ancestors will leave behind. It is the belief that there is a limit to what a lord can own and that the community has a moral right to the means of its own survival. When you stand up in the village assembly to argue about grazing rights or the timing of the harvest, you are practicing a form of local democracy that is older than the parliaments of kings. You are establishing the principle that those who work the land have a voice in how it is managed. This is the seed of civil liberty, planted in the muddy soil of a medieval village. You pass the small stone church, its windows dark now, but its presence a constant anchor. Within those walls, the records of your people are kept, not in grand chronicles of war, but in the memory of the community. You think of the festivals, the feast days, and the songs that echo through the rafters during the harvest home. This culture of the peasantry is a shield against the crushing reality of poverty and toil. By turning the hard work of the harvest into a celebration, you reclaim your humanity. You are not just a tool of production for the Lord. You are a person who dances, who sings, and who finds meaning in the cycles of the seasons. This cultural resilience is what keeps your spirit intact when the rains fail or the plague returns. It is the refusal to let the hardship of your life define the totality of your existence. As the moon rises higher, casting long shadows across the fields, you consider the physical legacy you will leave. Look at the hedgerows that line the path. You and your father and his father before him planted these. You dug the drainage ditches that keep the valley from turning into a swamp. You cleared the stones from the north field and used them to build the walls that stand today. These are not just agricultural improvements. They are the foundations of the modern world. Long after the feudal system has crumbled and the names of the local lords have been forgotten, the shape of the land will still bear your mark. The very geography of the countryside is a map of peasant labor, a testament to the endurance of the common worker. There is also a deeper, more personal legacy that you carry in your very blood. You have survived the great mortality. You have lived through years where the grain rotted in the ground and the belly groaned with hunger. Because you survived, you have passed on a biological grit to the generations that will follow. The survivors of the medieval era were the architects of a new kind of human resilience. When the labor shortage followed the Great Plague, you realized your own worth. You learned to walk away from a cruel master, to demand higher wages, and to seek a better life in the growing towns. You were the first to break the chains of serfdom, not through a single grand revolution, but through 1,000 small acts of defiance and 1,000,000 miles of walking toward opportunity. You reach the edge of your own small garden plot. Here you grow the herbs and vegetables that supplement the grain from the open fields. You think of the knowledge you possess, the understanding of which plants heal a fever and which ones can preserve meat through the winter. This traditional knowledge is a vital part of the unbroken line. It is a science of survival passed from mother to daughter and father to son. It is a testament to the intelligence of the supposedly unlettered peasant. You may not read Latin, but you read the clouds, the soil, and the behavior of the birds. You understand the complex machinery of the natural world better than any scholar in a distant university. As you lift the latch on your cottage door, the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs greets you. You see your children sleeping by the hearth, and you realize that they are the most important part of the legacy. They are the living connection to a future you will never see. In their veins flows the blood of people who could not be erased by famine or silenced by lords. They will grow up to be the craftsmen, the merchants, and the farmers of a new era. They will inhabit a world where the rights you fought for are taken for granted, and where the resilience you forged in the fire of the Middle Ages becomes the bedrock of a new civilization. You sit down by the dying embers of the fire and feel the deep ache in your muscles. It is a tired, honest pain. It is the physical sensation of a life well lived in the face of impossible odds. You are part of an unbroken line of survivors that stretches back to the beginning of time and forward to the present day. When people in the future look back at this time, They might focus on the kings in their castles or the knights in their armor, but the real story of history is your story. It is the story of the person who kept the fire burning, who kept the plow moving, and who kept the hope of a better tomorrow alive in the darkest of nights. You are the ancestor of the modern world. Every time a person stands up for their rights at work, every time a community comes together to protect a local park, and every time an individual finds the strength to endure a period of hardship, they are channeling your spirit. You taught the world how to survive. You taught the world that the strength of the many is greater than the power of the few. You taught the world that even in the shadow of the manor, a person can walk with their head held high. The room grows quiet, and the last of the firelight flickers out. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow will bring more work, more challenges, and more opportunities to prove your strength. But you are not afraid. You are a peasant, a survivor, and a link in the unbroken line of human resilience. You are the foundation upon which everything else is built. As you drift into sleep, the sounds of the village night surround you, a peaceful reminder that despite everything, you are still here. The lords may claim the land, and the plagues may claim the body, but the spirit of the resilient remains unconquered, echoing through the centuries as a testament to the power of the ordinary human being. You are the reason the story continues. You are the reason the fields are green and the hearths are warm. Your life, so often overlooked by the writers of grand histories, is the most important story of all. It is a story of grit, of community, and of an enduring love for the life you have carved out of the wilderness. As you rest, the world continues to turn, shaped by your hands and moved by your will. The legacy of the medieval peasant is not a relic of the past. It is a living, breathing reality that defines the very essence of what it means to be human. You have endured, and because you endured, the world moved forward. You are the unbroken line, and your resilience is the greatest gift you could ever leave behind.